I've presented as yet via this venue about the relationship between the Democratic Party, the coronavirus scamdemic, and Black Lives Matter and Antifa, which appears to be politically driven out of panic that Donald Trump is going to take the election with a very large majority of votes from Black citizens of the United States, which has caused the Democrats no end of panic, as I'm going to explain here. All of this appears to be very artificial, very fabricated, and for reasons that are driven by politics. So this is a rebroadcast of the DNC CV conspiracy, how BLM, Antifa, and the Democratic agenda fit together, first broadcast on 12 July 2020. As most of you are aware, I am a former Marine Corps officer, resigned my commission as a captain to enter graduate school and earn a PhD in the history and the philosophy of science. I specialize in collaborative research, bringing groups of experts together to take cases apart to sort out what really happened, including beginning with JFK, the assassination, where I published 3 collections of expert studies that blew apart the cover-up and implicated those who were in fact responsible for the assassination by discovering that the evidence on which the Warren report was based was fabricated, altered, and manufactured, including autopsy x-rays that had been patched to conceal a fist-sized blowout to the back of the head, fired by a shot from the right front, that the brain shown in diagrams and photographs in the National Archives isn't even the brain of JFK, and that the whole movies, including especially the Zapruder, for example, were being massively edited to conceal the true causes of the death of the President of the United States. Now, I have published over 25 or 24 academic and scholarly books and another dozen plus in the area of conspiracy research, where, for example, I brought together 13 experts to sort out what happened at Sandy Hook, and where we discovered that the school had been closed by 2008, that there were no students there, that it was a 2-day FEMA drill presented as mass murder to promote gun control. Now, when I published that book in 2015, with Mike Palachuk as my series editor, it sold nearly 500 copies in less than a month when Amazon banned it. So Mike and I realized we needed a different outlet for our publications, our research in this area, and we founded moonrockbooks.com. Now, of the dozen volumes published by Moonrock Books shown here, Amazon has now banned 6. Absolutely stunning. Not only nobody died at Sandy Hook, and I suppose we didn't go to the moon either, which Mike suggested might be an appropriate retort to hearing nobody died at Sandy Hook. Oh, and I suppose we didn't go to the moon either. And nobody died in Boston either, and from Orlando to Dallas and beyond, and political theater in Charlottesville, and the Parkland puzzle, how the pieces fit together. This is a massive onslaught and abuse by Amazon.com, which has transformed them from a public venue where they're benefiting the American people by allowing everyone to publish their piece, present their evidence, and for the public to sort it out, to the role of a publisher. In other words, they're no longer like a library, where the library is not responsible for the contents of the books, but makes them readily available to everyone, to now the role of a publisher by exercising censorship over what you are allowed to read, just as YouTube has censored what you're allowed to watch. So what I do is to apply the 4 stages of scientific reasoning to these complex and controversial cases, including puzzlement, something doesn't fit into your background knowledge and experience. At Sandy Hook, there was a sign, everyone must check in. What was that all about? There was pizza and bottled water at the firehouse, porta potties already in place. I asked police officers if they'd ever heard of this at a crime scene, and they laughed. What are the possible alternative explanations? Clearly, I mean, we discovered even the manual for the 2-day FEMA exercise. There was no surge of EMTs into the building, no string of ambulances to rush their little bodies off to hospitals where they'd be pronounced dead or alive. So we had to confront, was it real or was it staged? What were the probabilities of the available evidence on the alternatives? Well, if it was real, all of these were very powerful contraindications. If it was fake, however, they were very consistent. And there's no doubt that the evidence in the case of Sandy Hook settled down, in which case we're entitled to accept the best supported hypothesis as true in the tentative and fallible fashion of science. So, I mean, if you look at the evidence, which most Americans refuse to do, even a sister of my own told me after she'd been arrested at a protest and rode in a paddy wagon with Jane Fonda, of whom I used to be very fond, and it was confronting me about this lawsuit brought against me as a form of punishment for exposing what had really happened. I asked her to look at the evidence, and she said to me, I don't have to look at the evidence. Well, that's very, very unfortunate attitude, because we all have to look at the evidence. Even that great paradigm of scientific knowledge, classical Newtonian physics, which stood for 200 years as the embodiment of the certainty of scientific knowledge, turned out to be a special limiting case of general relativity advanced by Einstein, which reflects the tentative and fallible character of conclusions drawn in science. Tentative with the access to more evidence and alternative hypotheses, we may have to revise our position and reject hypotheses we previously accepted, accept hypotheses we previously rejected, and leave others in suspense. Infallible in the sense that even the best supported hypothesis, of which classical Newtonian physics was the perfect paradigm, may ultimately turn out to be false. So what's going on here? It turns out we've been played for suckers and saps. Even the CDC has announced that a positive result for a coronavirus test may only mean that you have had a cold. The common cold virus is in the same family as a COVID-19 virus. Just think about shutting down the economy over the common cold. And most Black Americans don't want fewer police, they want more. It's a shocker, but the CDC has admitted that a positive result may only mean you previously contracted the common cold, that you have antibodies from an infection with a virus from the same family. Here again, a positive test result shows you may have antibodies from an infection with a virus that causes COVID-19. However, a positive result may mean that you have antibodies from an infection with a virus from the same family, such as the one that causes the common cold, which is a completely different matter. We have the president of the Bulgarian Pathology Association, who's a notable scientific figure, Dr. Stolan Alexov, who's declaring no one has died from the coronavirus. Fascinating. A high-profile European pathology is reporting he and his colleagues across Europe have found no evidence of any deaths from the novel coronavirus on that continent. He goes on to say, describe the World Health Organization as a criminal medical organization for creating worldwide fear and chaos without providing objectively verifiable proof of a pandemic. Another stunning revelation, he believes it's currently impossible to create a vaccine against the virus. Why? Because the European pathologists haven't identified any antibodies that are specific for SARS-CoV-2. What that means is everything you're hearing about a vaccine and vaccinations is not justified on the basis of science, even though the allegation is made that they are, but rather has a completely different and alas, far more sinister agenda driving it. Meanwhile, the majority of Black Americans don't back Black Lives Matter's push to abolish the police. This is a very significant result because any anti-racist movement disregarding how working and middle-class African Americans define and pursue the good life isn't worthy of the name. Multiple polls have shown that African American attitudes toward the police are anything but aligned with Black Lives Matter, even if they view the police as treating them unfairly. In other words, in particular, even if they think that the police do abuse them intermittently on the basis of their race, they don't therefore believe that the police should be abolished. On the contrary, 4 polls debunk that narrative, which Republican-like Maine Senator Susan Collins continues to parrot. She recently claimed African Americans, implying all African Americans, believe they can be killed anywhere at any time by anyone, but especially by law enforcement. This is very disappointing because in the past I've regarded Susan Collins as a very astute intellect, a woman of great courage and integrity, at which she demonstrated during the Brett Kavanaugh hearings, when she gave one of the best speeches I have ever heard on the floor of the Senate as to how she had reasoned through to the conclusion that he deserved to be confirmed as an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court. A 2019 Pew survey showed 44% of Blacks reported being unfairly stopped by police because of their race, but 54% know that hadn't happened to them. 44% of African Americans in a Monmouth poll said they or an immediate family member had felt harassed by police, but again, a majority don't share that view. Despite being the racial group with the most unfavorable view of law enforcement, a majority of the Black participants want more police officers in their neighborhoods. That's no fluke. A 2015 Gallup poll, not only did Blacks with unfavorable views of police want more police patrolling their living areas, they are more likely to want them than African Americans who view police favorably. How's that for an irony? Meanwhile, how to count a case has been redefined. If you test positive, they now contact anyone in contact with you as positive. And it turns out on the average, any one of us is in contact with like 17 other persons. So every time they get a positive test, and remember, this could just be for having had the cold, for which you developed antibodies, and there's no specific test for the SARS-CoV-2 that's supposed to be the troublemaker. They not count you positive, but 17 others. This is why we're getting this vast exaggeration in the numbers. They don't distinguish between having the virus and really being sick. This is an example of the elementary fallacy of ambiguity or equivocation, where even the president observes our testing success is being used against us. So we have the oddity that while it looked as though the virus was dropping, where it seems to peak at 40 days and then disappear after 70. We now have cases rising in 40 out of 50 states, which is highly anomalous. Here you see a survey of a whole lot of states where in only one is there a drop and all the others a rise because they're manufacturing the outcomes. I wrote a letter to the Wisconsin State Journal, where I reside near Madison. Case fallacy of ambiguity, editor. Most readers assume that your lead stories as more people get sick, restrictions tighten again, and big spike in COVID cases nationwide forces retreat are about the same thing, but they would be mistaken. The big spike concerns test outcomes for having the CV virus, but that is not the same thing as getting sick. Almost all of us have one CV virus or another, but we are not therefore showing symptoms or sick. Coronavirus is a genus of which the CV is a species. The common cold, for example, is a coronavirus, but our leading experts, such as Dr. Anthony Fauci, are not explaining the difference to the public. Counties, states, and cities that have not locked down are doing at least as well as those that have. And those which have used HCQ hydroxychloroquine are doing the best of all, which Fauci has known since 2005. HCQ is a wonder drug for coronavirus. An article that year in Virology, a publication of the National Institutes of Health, of which he is a director, explains that it works as both a cure if you have it and a preventative if you don't. What this means is that nobody had to die from CV. Nobody. The governors of Florida, Texas, and California do not understand the difference because deaths are not climbing, but numbers with the virus are increasing. The death rate from CV continues to fall. The threat posed by coronavirus is no greater than the seasonal flu. Actually, many studies have suggested it's less serious. Even the president has recognized the problem here, as he has tweeted. In a certain way, our tremendous testing success gives the fake news media all they want: cases. In the meantime, deaths and the all-important mortality rate goes down. You won't hear about that from the fake news, and you never will. Anybody need a ventilator? I mean, this is really significant where the president understands. Here are projections about the death rate that show how it's been dropping so dramatically, approaching zero. And yet we have a recent report from a guy in Texas who is very troubled about the growing increase there of cases in his state. His physician agreed with him, and he sent a set of 10 different tests that had never been applied to anybody in for evaluation, and they came back all positive for CV. Mind you, the tests are rigged to give a positive result. Meanwhile, deception is indispensable to the Democratic agenda. They need a pseudo justification for mail-in voting, which they can easily control. They need a pseudo justification for shutting down rallies and campaign events, a pseudo justification for a virtual Democratic convention in Milwaukee, a pseudo justification for keeping blue state economies shut down. All this in a misguided belief that by trashing the economy, they're going to deprive the president of a re-election, knowing that the greatest strength that a president has historically have been a robust economy and a soaring stock market, like which we've never seen better before than under President Trump. Turns out state health departments are manipulating the data, changing the definitions as I've been explaining. Why? Without COVID-19 panic, Democrats cannot easily achieve mail-in voting, which they desperately need in key battleground states in order to control the outcome. Without COVID-19 panic, Democrats cannot shut down rallies and political campaigning efforts of President Trump, which they desperately need to do in key battleground states. Without COVID-19 panic, Democrats cannot block the campaign contrast between an energetic President Trump and a physically tenuous, mentally compromised challenger. Without COVID-19 panic, Democrats do not have an excuse for canceling the DNC convention in Milwaukee, thereby blocking Team Bernie Sanders from visible opposition while protecting candidate gibberish from himself. Without COVID-19 panic, Democrats do not have a mechanism to keep voters isolated from each other, limiting communication and national debate adverse to their interests. COVID-19 pushes the national conversation into the digital space, where big tech controls every element of the conversation and can censor you wildly, as they have been doing. Without COVID-19 panic, Democrats cannot keep their blue state economies easily shut down and continue to block U.S. economic growth. All thriving economies are against the political interest of the Democrats. Without COVID-19 panic, Democrats cannot easily keep club candidate Joe Biden sealed in the basement where the electorate is not exposed to visible signs of his dementia. Without COVID-19 panic, it becomes more difficult for big tech to censor voices that would outline the fraud and scheme. With COVID panic, they have a better method and an excuse. Without COVID-19 panic, Democrats cannot advance, influence, or organize their preferred presidential debate format, a virtual presidential debate series where Joe Biden and the president would simply be seen on a video screen, and where they can have panels of answers for Biden to simply read while he presents, which the public would be unable to discern. All these and more strategic outcomes are based on the manufactured weaponization of the COVID-19 virus to achieve a larger political objective. There is zero benefit to anyone other than Democrats for the overwhelming hype surrounding COVID-19. Now, here's a guy who's got it right.
What we're actually seeing is the systematic implementation of the fall of the republic and the rise of the corporation of the United States. Every major event is a step in the ladder to achieve that end. COVID is just another rung in the ladder, which is why there's a deliberate mixing of all the wordplay, right? I mean, we should stop calling it, quarantine. That's a term designated for people that are verified sick. This is a house arrest mandated by the state. You should stop calling it, social distancing. There's nothing social about forced isolation. We should stop saying safer at home when millions of Americans don't have basic necessities adequate to fit their needs. It assumes that everybody's home is equally as safe as the people that are making the statements. We should stop saying, this is for the greater good, right? When you close the economy, killing millions of businesses that families have worked generations to establish, that's anything but good. We should stop saying, this is the new normal. That's just blatant mind control drivel. There's nothing normal about forced isolation, treating your neighbor like they have the plague, breathing your own bodily waste, wearing masks, living in constant fear of contamination. That's normal. I mean, after all, if the virus is so deadly, why hasn't it wiped out the homeless who don't social distance, wash themselves regularly, let alone, live in or have access to a sterile environment? Last year, 1.5 million people died of tuberculosis. Why were you not wearing a mask during the tuberculosis pandemic? You were endangering, public health and safety along with billions of other people around the globe. So why didn't you wear a mask? I'll tell you why. Because the mainstream media didn't tell you to wear a mask, right? It's because though 1.5 million people died from tuberculosis, there was no tuberculosis pandemic any more than there's a coronavirus pandemic. What you're really participating in is a beta test for AI systems and facial recognition. See, these cameras work best when people are, distance apart. Now they're actually testing through machine learning how to recognize, a face that's partially covered. It's also a way to easily determine who's compliant and who's not. Who does the propaganda work on and who it doesn't? Now get this, there's some ironies that are here, right? A society that kills millions of babies a year for convenience has shut itself down to prevent adults from dying. People that on the one hand slaughter babies in the womb by the millions are now preaching to the masses about the sanctity of human life. It's double speak, double talk. It's the two doctrine policy, one for the initiated, one for the uninitiated, one for the inner circle, another for the masses. It's like saying, if I violate the stay-at-home order, I can be arrested, but you're letting convicted criminals out of prison so they don't get coronavirus. Thesis, antithesis, synthesis. If there's a real pandemic, does it require, faulty virus models, rigged test results, 81% false positives, inaccurate news reporting, staged hospital overruns, manipulated death certificates? Nope. When the government shuts down, millions of small businesses, but doesn't lay off any government employees, it's not about the health. When the state bans dentists from practicing but deems it necessary for abortion clinics to stay open, it's not about your health. When the state prevents you from buying seeds for your garden but allows you to purchase lottery tickets, it's not about your health. An institution that has the ability to destroy all of Earth through alleged nuclear warfare should not regulate personal self-defense. An institution that's caught trafficking drugs shouldn't be able to regulate plants. An institution that's racked up 23 trillion prior to coronavirus in debt shouldn't be allowed to manage the retirement fund. Mm-hmm. An institution that was caught spreading STDs should not be allowed to run healthcare. And people are really concerned about public health and safety, in general, but they don't care if people eat garbage, drink poison, smoke cancer, and take prescription drugs, but think that toilet paper, hand sanitizer, and masks are going to protect them from the boogeyman coronavirus. This is a special kind of stupid that I can't address here. You should ask yourself a couple basic questions. When did you consent from you creating a government to serve you to you serving the government ruling over you? If you want to know, who's in charge, just think about who you can and can't criticize.
I think that's about the most brilliant commentary I've ever seen. In brief compass, simply sensational. It's not coincidental all corporate media are all in to facilitate the demand fear that Democrats need in order to achieve their objectives. There's an alignment of all big government institutions and multinational corporations to support this objective. Nothing is coincidental. Everything is political. This captures it all. It's not about the virus. It's all about control. Meanwhile, this is all consistent with the very first conspiracy guide where I addressed the coronavirus pandemic, medical emergency or political pandemic. They were faking the data from the beginning. This was a political pandemic, not a medical emergency. There were financial incentives for classifying patients as coronavirus. Fauci even predicted Trump would face a pandemic years before. Here we have Minnesota State Senator Scott Jensen, who also happens to be a physician, who discovered the problem when he had a patient who died who'd never been tested and was asked to classify him as a CD victim. It turns out that the hospitals, Medicare is determining if you have a COVID-19 admission, you get $13,000. We have several days ago, Scott Jensen telling the local media he'd received a directive from the Minnesota Department of Health to list COVID-19 as a cause of death on death certificates, even if patients had never been tested. Asked why officials would want to inflate the death certificates, he said, "Fear is a great way to control people, and I worry about that," as indeed he would. Meanwhile, you take a look at the death rates for Minnesota residents, and they just happen to correspond to the normal death rate you would expect, where the average life expectancy of an American citizen is 78.54 years. And look at the distribution here. You're getting a max out in that category, in that vicinity, which means most of the deaths that are occurring are being mistakenly or falsely labeled as COVID deaths when they simply occurred in the normal course of events. Here's a nice illustration, a comparison chart showing how differently these events have been treated. For example, the annual seasonal flu between 2017 and 2018 took 61,000 lives. But it wasn't declared to be a pandemic. There was no emergency call. The US government, the media snoozed through it, a routine vaccination program. Or the N1H1 flu of 2009 and 2010. You had 12,469 deaths. Global pandemic was declared. A US emergency was declared, got a certain amount of attention, but not a lot from the media. The US response, a special vaccination program. But when it comes to the COVID-19 flu, For the first quarter from 2019 to 2020 through March 30th, we had only 2,405 deaths, and yet it was declared to be a global pandemic. A U.S. emergency was called. Attention of the U.S. government was through the roof, unbelievably stunning, 24/7. Lockdown, social distancing, destruction of the U.S. economy, absolutely unbelievable. So when you contrast with, for example, deaths from cancer, which they never do, they don't want to, the media doesn't want you to have any perspective on this. 606,880. Nobody gets excited about that compared to, at the time, 2,405. Or heart disease, 647,000. Vastly more than the COVID-19. Medical errors, 250,000 die every year. I mean, look, this is all indication this is a political pandemic. Check out this. We got President Trump is going to be challenged by a surprise global disease outbreak, according to Dr. Anthony Fauci himself back in 2017. Think about it. At a forum on pandemic preparedness at Georgetown, Dr. Fauci made an interesting statement in 2017. He told the audience the Trump administration would not only be challenged by ongoing global health threats such as influenza and HIV, but also a surprise disease outbreak. Meanwhile, what's fascinating about that is the following. Dr. Fauci is the guy who's supposed to be preparing us for pandemics. So if he known since 2017, why hasn't he prepared us? Not only that, but how can it be coming as a surprise if he knows in 2017? I mean, look, this is a very serious indictment of Anthony Fauci, to whom I refer as Tony the Rat. He's very deeply involved in all of this. Meanwhile, the admirable state senator has been called out now. He's under investigation by the Board of Medical Practice in Minnesota, even though Scott Jensen was the Minnesota Family Doctor of the Year. I mean, this is because it's an inconvenient truth. This is the sort of thing for which books get banned or for which you have a lawsuit thrown against you to punish you, to drag you into court, draw it out for a long time, run up legal bills just because you've exposed truths the deep state doesn't want the public to know. Oh, what could drive this level of manipulation? Everything we're told about COVID-19 is fabricated or fake. The Democrats appear to be allied with the deep state. Antifa and Black Lives Matter are its paramilitary arm. They are destroying America to defeat Donald Trump. Meanwhile, we learn that Black Lives Matter is actually a scam. It turns out to be a desperate attempt to raise campaign funds for Joe Biden. It isn't even a nonprofit, registered as a for-profit corporation. Here's an Asian American who did research and is reporting what he discovered. You're going to be stunned.
Welcome back. So recently there's been some troubling news coming out of the Black Lives Matter movement. And it is that when you decide to donate to them, you go to their website, you end up donating to Act Blue. And people have uncovered, well, what is Act Blue? They're essentially this fundraising arm for the Democrat campaign. And you can see some of their top recipients have been Bernie Sanders, Biden, Elizabeth Warren, Pete for America, Democratic Congressional Campaign, Amy for America, Friends of Andrew Yang. So you get a lot of these Democrats mixed into this whole thing when you donate to Black Lives Matter. And it just makes me wonder, what do the Democrats have to do with this whole racial police brutality movement? It seems like they're just mixing up a bunch of stuff. And so then Al started making sense to me why Nancy Pelosi was dressed up in African garbs, playing along with this movement. And if you think about it, it is an election year after all. So isn't it strange that the timing just so happens to be that it seems like every time Black Lives Matter comes up, the last time was around 2016, it always seems to be this election year. And so somebody here says, you guys, Democrats quite literally used George Floyd's death to emergency fundraise for Joe Biden's campaign, and that it was all just a scam. And so even if you were to look more deeply into this a few days ago, Kaylee Scales, who's the managing director for Black Lives Matter, didn't ask me anything on Reddit. And people are asking, where does the money go? What do you use it for? And she never replied. She never answered a single question about it, and people are saying this is really weird. And you can see here, there's another question. Okay, they're getting millions and millions of dollars in donations, right? Tons of people are funding them. And yet there's just no answer about this. And what we do know is the funds are going through Act Blue. Act Blue also happens to be this huge Democratic arm for fundraising. And the Black Lives Matter website, by the way, people have figured out that it's not even a registered 501c3 nonprofit. They're a private corporation. It's not a charity. And so I want to take a moment here to clarify my political stance, which is that I am neither Republican nor Democrat. I don't even care. I don't vote. I'm more nihilistic, actually. I'm like chaotic neutral. And so this is the illusion of choice. You give people a little bit of choice between two things, Democrat or Republican. At the end of the day, you're still funneling power into white supremacy organizations, right? Congress is mostly composed of white people. And so here's my hypothesis. Maybe the whole blacklivesmatter.com website, that domain was bought out by the Democrats. And every election year, they find some civil unrest and they use this as a way to gain support from the Black community in order to vote Democrat. And then this organization, which some people say is funded by billionaire George Soros, fans the flames. They cause civil unrest, create protests, just cause general discontent so that people are unhappy with the current situation. And then their ultimate goal is propaganda. Now, as I was taking a look at this whole Black Lives Matter website, I also saw that if you check out their What We Believe section, there's so many other issues that are being mixed into this. So for example, people say that this movement is against fathers, against traditional families. On their website, they say we disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family structure by supporting each other as extended families and the villages that collectively care for one another, especially our children, to the degree that mothers and parents are comfortable. Well, nowhere in this sentence does it say father. In fact, they seem to intentionally exclude that word as if you don't really need fathers in society anymore. For some strange reason, this movement is also being mixed in with the whole LGBTQ community. They say, we foster a queer affirming network. When we gather, we do so with the intention of freeing ourselves from the tight grip of heteronormative thinking. Abortion is mixed into this as well. They say we deserve it and thus we demand reproductive justice, i.e. abortion that gives us autonomy over our bodies. And so the issue is, some people think this is a police brutality issue, or maybe it's even a race issue. So they donate money to the movement, and in the process, they start supporting all of these other side movements like the Democrat Party, anti-fathers, abortion, homosexuality, and a bunch of other stuff that really has nothing to do with this whole issue. The Black Lives Matter movement has essentially been co-opted by all of these other agendas. Now, while I'm on this topic, I also wanted to highlight some other disturbing news. The other day, protesters, they toppled some Confederate statue and it landed on somebody's head, and that person got critically injured. They started convulsing. You could see their skull. It's really ridiculous and tragic. And these protesters and rioters, they're no better than the police. They're damaging public property. They're causing real physical damage to each other. There's a way in which you can have a protest and gain the support of the public opinion. But if you're going to protest this way, no matter how much I personally want to support the cause, I cannot support something like this. There's this other disturbing piece of news where a UCLA professor is now on leave because he did not want to postpone an exam only for students of the Black community. So here's what happened. Some students asked him to give Black students special treatment on the exam. And his response is, thanks for your suggestion in your email below. Given the tragedy in Minnesota, do you know the names of the classmates that are Black? How can I identify them since we're only having online exams? Are there any students that may be of mixed parentage, such as half Black, half Asian? What do you suggest I do with respect to them? A full concession or just half? And so here he's explaining that, how do you even define what Black really means, right? Like we saw Elizabeth Warren. She was like 1% Native American or something, and then she claimed to be Native American. So I believe that this is a fair and logical question. And then he goes on to say, do you have any idea if any of the students are from Minneapolis? I assume they're probably especially devastated as well. I'm thinking that a white student from there may even be more devastated by this, especially because some might think that they're racist, even if they're not. And so here he's saying that, well, maybe you should offer privilege based on, say, geography, say being from Minneapolis, in which you're especially struck from the recent events, than simply based on color. And that's a fair and valid question. I don't sense any racism. He's just treating all of the students the same, and he's saying that rather than try to distinguish people based on their skin color, let's take a look at their geographies if you really want to prioritize people's privileges. He says, can you guide me on how you think I should achieve a no-harm outcome since our sole course grade is from this final exam only? Remember that MLK famously said that people should not be evaluated based on the color of their skin. And then suddenly everyone said that this guy is racist, and this professor is on leave now. which essentially is the same thing that's happening to me, right? Like I retweeted this person, Candace Owen, who's just been asking questions. Where are the funds going? People are asking questions. And then I'm being called a racist. Well, no, it's not really racist to ask a valid question like, hey, where are these funds going? That's not racist. That's simply a question that people are asking. And not only that, it's a question meant to help the Black Lives Matter community, right? Because as much as I personally am against identity politics, I don't like the idea that some people who think that they're donating for one cause end up donating to the Democrat campaign. At the end of the day, when I look at this, I think that there are two ways in which we are handling racism. There's one group who are saying that there should be affirmative action. There should be privilege awarded based on skin color to make up for all of the past occurrences and systemic bias within the system. And there could be some valid point here. There's another viewpoint, which is the viewpoint that I tend to believe that moving forward, we should not be using skin color as a classification technique, but rather just award privilege based on socioeconomic class or geography, kind of like what Professor Klein was suggesting. In this viewpoint, perhaps it's more of a naive or idealistic one in which you don't see color, you don't focus on it, you don't classify people based on color, you don't even acknowledge skin color, you just say that there's people. You just say people, everybody is the color gray, their race is human, their ethnicity is from planet Earth. That's kind of the approach that I've been going for. So that'll do for me. I encourage you guys to get yourselves educated. Hope you enjoyed the episode, and I'll see you in the next one. Welcome back.
What a brilliant guy. What a completely brilliant guy and fantastic. Meanwhile, a radical Seattle City Council member, Kashima Sawant, wants to overthrow the United States and replace it with a socialist world. Is becoming increasingly clear that the Antifa and Black Lives Matter aren't just protesting for racial justice, but they actually want to dump the United States. In other words, this is sabotage, subversion. Lest anyone think this is hyperbole, here's the close of her speech. We are coming to dismantle this deeply oppressive, racist, sexist, violent, utterly bankrupt system of capitalism, this police state. We cannot and will not stop until we overthrow it and replace it with a world based instead on solidarity, genuine democracy, and equality, a socialist world. Before Sawant vowed to overthrow the United States, she threatened Amazon owner Jeff Bezos in his class, saying, "We are coming for you and your rotten system. If you attempt again to overturn the Amazon tax, working people will go all out in the thousands to defeat you, and we will not stop there. Because, you see, we are fighting for far more than this tax. We're preparing the ground for a different kind of society. And if you, Jeff Bezos, want to drive that process forward by lashing out against us in our modest demands, then so be it. Because we are coming for you and your rotten system." I mean, this is a subversion. This is treason. I mean, this is grotesque. Also, they even destroyed a statue of an elk in Portland. Now, a lot of people thought that was kind of bananas. That was a very strange thing. But the rioters, as the author explains, aren't really out to bring about a societal repudiation of racism or white supremacy at all. That's just a pretext. If they were, they wouldn't have gone after Grant and Lincoln, and they didn't go after them because they were too miseducated or propagandized to know better. What they want to do is a very definition of terrorism, to strike fear into the hearts of a population so its entire existence is consumed by it, and it becomes paralyzed, unable to act even in its own defense, or in a slightly varied, to instill fear in the population and make it more amenable to manipulation to achieve a certain political agenda. Antifa and Black Lives Matter are terrorists not just because they're open Marxists who want to destroy the United States as a free republic and establish an authoritarian socialist state in its place. They're also terrorists because terror is one of their principal tactics. They want to make you afraid. They want to make you think the ground is unsteady beneath your feet, that the old order is crumbling, and that they represent the new energized vanguard, or what another terrorist, Osama bin Laden, called the strong horse, except that's a bad example. Osama was actually our man in Afghanistan. He was instrumental in getting Stinger missiles into the hands of the Mujahideen they used to shoot down Soviet helicopters and planes. He was actually an officer in the CIA, Colonel Tim Osman. He was visited by an official of the agency at a hospital in Dubai shortly before his death from his medical maladies on 15 December 2001. That's right, 15 December 2001, 10 years before the completely fake raid on the compound orchestrated by Osama bin Laden, who felt that Osama had to die again to position Osama for a triumphal re-election. Even both CNN and Fox News reported his death on December 26, 2001. He was buried in an unmarked grave in accordance with Muslim tradition. There were local obituaries. David Ray Griffin even has a whole book about it, Osama bin Laden, Dead or Alive. These people, the BLM and Antifa, are emulating Marxist states. They want us to be fearful that even if we're innocent of wrong thinking and unacceptable, they want to make you think that at any moment you yourself could be targeted and destroyed, even if you're as innocent of wrong thinking and unacceptable political opinions as the Portland elk. They emulate the Marxist states that have existed in the past in the Gulag Archipelago. Alexander Solzhenitsyn explained the law enforcement apparatus of Russia, Stalinist Russia, wasn't really interested in justice. They had no special reason for who they arrested or interrogated. They might be completely arbitrary. For example, in 1937, a woman came to the reception room of the NKVD to ask what she should do about an unfed, unweaned infant of a neighbor who'd been arrested. They said, "Sit down, we'll find out." She sat there for 2 hours, and then they threw her into a cell. They had a quota to make. It didn't matter how they did it. So the elk had to get it. The destruction of Portland's elk is a warning to the rest of us. You're next. Millions of Americans are getting the message and nodding obediently. Everywhere you look these days, you're inundated with tendentious leftist propaganda that will only exaggerate, not heal racist divisions. Many display this nonsense not because they're true believers, but because they are afraid. I know a man whose entire neighborhood has been displaying Black Lives Matter signs at the invitation of leftist activists who politely knocked on their door and asked them to do it. When they came to him, he readily agreed. He knew the unspoken subtext was if he did not, things would not go well for him in the future. That is life in the new Soviet America that has been germinating for years and has descended upon us suddenly. Meanwhile, Vice President Pence takes on Nancy Pelosi, calls her statue excuse a surrender to the mob, where Nancy Pelosi has been going along with it. As Pence observes, tearing down monuments is not protest. Burning churches is not free speech. To have the Speaker of the House affirm the rule of the mob tacitly is unconscionable. For Speaker Pelosi to say they will do what they will do as a surrender to the mob, we are not going to have it. Meanwhile, Antifa and Black Lives Matter are terrorist organizations. Terrorism entails the use of violence to instill fear into a target population, the point being to make it more amenable to political manipulation. Antifa and Black Lives Matter are conducting acts of terrorism across the nation. They're conducting a fundraising and a new voter recruiting effort. Over 1,000 Antifa terrorists rioted in Portland again, attacking businesses, police, the famous Oregon Trail statue. There are thousands of them at the Antifa riot downtown. They regrouped near the Portland Federal Courthouse again. According to Fox, 38th consecutive day of unrest in the city. The number now, of course, is about twice that. The mayor and the police clearly still don't have a handle on it. But tear gas helps. Antifa hates it. They're actually taking tear gas away in Seattle, where the chief of police has now explained to homeowners and businesses that they've got to fend for themselves because the police have been disarmed. Meanwhile, Antifa and BLM extremists have turned downtown Portland into an empty urban wasteland. That's what's going on in those cities. The rioters and criminals are attacking law enforcement. These are not protesters. These are criminals who got together and organized and planned and actually brought weapons. They brought shields. They brought frozen water bottles, rocks, lasers, weapons with the intent to destroy a federal building and harm law enforcement. I don't care what your ideological beliefs are, but your political affiliation regarding violence, we should all be united. It is wrong. Meanwhile, Black Lives Matter is a front for the DNC and for Hillary and Obama. Obama created an army of bureaucrats, 30,000 strong, to sabotage Trump. The progressive Democrats want to destroy America to rebuild it. They want a socialist communist society from the ground up. This is not a call for reform, but a violent revolution. Here's an article from way back when. This is back in February 11th, 2017. This is just post-inauguration. When former President Obama said he was heartened by anti-Trump protests, he was sending a message of approval to his troops. Troops? Yes. Obama has an army of agitators numbering more than 30,000 who will fight his Republican successor at every turn of his historical presidency, and Obama will command them from a bunker less than 2 miles from the White House. What's shaping up is a highly unusual post-presidency. Obama isn't just staying behind in Washington. He's working behind the scene to set up what will effectively be a shadow government. Not only protect his threatened legacy, but sabotage the incoming administration and its popular America First agenda. He's doing it through a network of leftist nonprofits led by Organizing for Action. Normally, you'd expect an organization set up to support a politician and his agenda close up shop after the candidate leave office, but not Obama's. Rather, it's gearing up for battle with a growing war chest and more than 250 offices across the country. Since Trump's election, this little-known but well-funded protesting arm has beefed up staff and ramped up recruitment of young liberal activists, declaring on its website, "We are not backing down." Determined to salvage Obama's legacy, it's drawing battle lines on immigration, Obamacare, race relations, and climate change. It's really fascinating. Obama's intimately involved in the operation, even tweets from the group's account. In fact, he gave marching orders to his foot soldier following Trump's upset victory. It's fine for everybody to feel stressed, sad, discouraged, he said in a conference call from the White House, but get over it and move forward to protect what we have accomplished. Now's the time for some organizing. This is just going on massive scale. Even Ilhan Omar is calling for the whole American political and economic system to be dismantled because of oppression. As long as our economy and political system prioritize profit without considering who is profiting, who is being shut out, we will perpetuate this inequality, she said. We cannot stop at criminal justice. We must begin the work of dismantling the whole system of oppression wherever we find it. And beyond Black Lives Matter, there's the NFAC, Not Effing Around Coalition, which is armed and militant, ex-military, extremely well-disciplined and expert marksmen. Some are white. This is like a cross between Antifa and Black Panthers. Meanwhile, BLM is going anti-white, anti-police, and anti-Israel. The militant extremist Black Lives Matter movement is not only being directly funded by hundreds of U.S. corporations who are overtly attempting to overthrow America, but now BLM has spawned the rise of an even more extreme militant group pledging to use force to overthrow U.S. states like Texas. Hundreds of the members of the NFAC Not Effing Around Coalition marched near Atlanta over the weekend, dressed in all-black uniforms, carrying AR-15s and other similar weapons, as they shouted their demands for defeating Texas and launching a new black ethno-state inside the USA. Described by one of its members as a backbone for the military of a new black nation, the NFAC has adopted an aggressive confrontational tone that implies kinetic conflict with whites and the US government. And why not? Since Black lives have now been given the ultimate Black privilege, Black supremacy across America, it seems there's no demand that's a bridge too far. Their plans include filing a Declaration of Liberation, where they claim they will declare every Black person in America as a political prisoner while demanding the U.S. government hand over territory that the NFAC will take for their own black ethno-state. They want another Chaz, in other words, but on a larger scale. The black-on-black shootings would no doubt start immediately, and the black ethno-state would quickly collapse into a Haiti-style shithole. But that is already obvious to everyone. Nowhere on earth has an armed, angry black mob created a peaceful, fair, and just society. Pretty disturbing. Here's the image of some. You notice a number of them are white. They've also directly issued a challenge to white militia and seem to be itching for a confrontation. Someone should probably tell them white militias don't stand around in the road like idiots waiting to be shot. They'll hit you with the element of surprise and defeat you before you even know what happened. Meanwhile, Black Lives Matter protesters call for death to Israel and the United States. At a pro-Palestinian Black Lives Matter rally in New York and Washington, chants were heard of death to Israel, death to America, from Gaza to Minnesota. Globalize it, intifada. Calls for abolishing the police were joined with calls to eliminate the Zionist state of Israel. Meanwhile, the Black Lives Matter co-founder in LA, nearly all white liberals in LA are white supremacists. You know, as even if you support Black Lives Matter, as a liberal, perhaps you're mistaken and confused. BLM has gone all in with an anti-white stance, which of course is inherently racist and bigoted. So it's important we say things. This is from a Black Lives Matter leader. Like, I see your sign, F Donald Trump. Yeah, F Donald Trump. That we remember that we live in a city that's largely liberal, white supremacist, said Dr. Melina Abdullah, co-founder of Black Lives Matter LA, told an enthusiastic crowd in a video posted by the People City Council. In case you're keeping track, Black and are now anti-police, anti-American, anti-white, anti-Semitic, anti-Israel, and totally opposed to the rule of law. Think about it. Thanks to unwavering support of the NBA, the NFL, and hundreds of corporations across America funding terrorist weapons acquisition by Black Lives Matter, Black Lives extremist groups are rising up, becoming more aggressive, violent, and overtly racist. They demand the killing of whites and destruction of Israel. They call for America to be torn down, demand the U.S. government give them a chunk of land so they can declare their own black reservation or autonomous zone, which will no doubt be very quickly ruled by some black warlord who carries an AK-47 and runs all the prostitution and child trafficking inside the zone. In Chaz, for example, 2 young black men were gunned down by black Chaz security forces, and now an 8-year-old black girl has been shot to death by militant Black Lives protesters in Atlanta. When you put black militants in charge, this is what you get: unbridled violence against black people and everyone else, which is exactly the situation in Chicago, where reportedly 79 people were shot over the July 4th weekend, mostly blacks, by the way. Zero attention to that statistic. Stop trying to negotiate with terrorists. It's a pointless exercise because there's no limit to their demands. Instead, President Trump and the Department of Justice must do 2 things: officially declare Black Lives Matter, Antifa, and the NFAC to be domestic terrorist groups, which they clearly are, deputize all concealed carry holders across America with the authority to engage and help defeat terrorists where such terrorists are spotted, problem solved. I think that Mike Adams got it right. Meanwhile, alarms and warnings are going unheeded. Atlanta's mayor, we're doing more harm to each other than the police. CNN anchor, Black Lives Matter is not to make black lives better. They object to white privilege but promote black privilege. Lincoln was anti-slavery but was not sufficiently pro-black. Here's the Atlanta mayor addressing the harsh truth to BLM via the Daily Mail. We're talked a lot about what we're demanding from our officers in our communities. We protested, we demonstrated, we've been angry, we've cried, we've demanded action. Well, now we're demanding action for Sequoia Turner and for all the other people who were shot in Atlanta last night and over the past weekends, because the reality is this: these aren't police officers shooting people on the streets of Atlanta. These are members of the community shooting each other, and in this case, it is the worst possible outcome. And anyone who's looked at the statistics realize that black on black crime is overwhelmingly more prevalent. That white on black is relatively rare. Black on white is more common than white on black. I mean, it's absolutely stunning. There's a complete distortion here in the media. Meanwhile, CNN's Don Lemon lectured Terry Crews that Black Lives Matter doesn't care about, when he points out that Black Lives Matter doesn't care about all black lives. Cruz initially reiterated comments by not working with a white community. BLM is becoming its own supremacist group. When you have the leaders of the BLM who are talking about, we don't get our demands, we're going to burn it down. Other black people talking about working with other whites and other races who are being viewed as sellouts or called Uncle Toms, you start to understand you are now being controlled. They're not being treated as loved. You're actually being controlled. Someone who wants to control the narrative, he said. It was almost a supremacist move when they viewed their Black Lives Matter a lot more than mine. This is all pretty embarrassing. Meanwhile, UW-Madison students, I mean, the University of Madison, Wisconsin-Madison is a hop, skip, and a jump from my home here in a village of Oregon, just 10 miles south of Madison, called for the removal of a Lincoln statue. Just because he was anti-slavery doesn't mean he was pro-black. I mean, give us a break. Meanwhile, Antifa and Black Lives Matter are using paid crisis actors. Craigslist ad for anti-Trump actors, especially minorities in Phoenix. Atlanta's Black Panther group came straight from Central Casting. Models and actors from Atlanta's film and entertainment industry. Whitney Oney, an Atlanta model, said, "Important to use my voice." Here's a screenshot of a Craigslist ad soliciting 500 actors for a protest at the Phoenix Convention Center, specifically seeking actors who are anti-Trump racial minorities. You're going to be paid $15 an hour. Meanwhile, a much photographed and reported Black Panther group at a protest in cities across Georgia came straight from Central Casting. Chris Joyner reported in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, "It's hard to stand out when you're in a sea of thousands of frustrated sign-waving protesters, but in marches and demonstrations over the past week in Atlanta, Decatur, and even Cumming, a small knot of charismatic young people kept getting photographs. They said they were Black Panthers. They looked the part with all black attire and black berets adorned with a cat head patch. Their leader was a tall, thin black woman armed with an assault rifle and a determined look. Photos of the group popped up in local outlets, but also in the British tabloid press. It's easy to see why the group attracted attention. In a moment of fury over police shooting at black people, the group was perfectly cast, maybe too perfect. Within a few days, an activist on Twitter sussed out the group was comprised of models and actors from Atlanta's film and entertainment industry. A Twitter user going by the Wolf the Red identified them from their Instagram accounts, where he found the group modeling hot culture, publicizing their film credits, but zero prior demonstrations, no posts with guns, no calls to action. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution reached out to members of the group, including Whitney Oney, the striking woman who drew so much attention. She's an Atlanta-based graphic designer and a model. She said it was important to use my voice and to dress the part, the outfits. We just pulled inspiration from the Black Panthers. She said it was mostly black and leather pleather. Some of us are vegans, vegetarians. Well, this kind of fakery is the kind of thing we've seen before. Turns out the alleged mother of Heather Heyer in Charlottesville, who called herself Susan Bro, looked very familiar. Here, compare her with a Sandy Hook mother of one of the alleged teachers at Sandy Hook. Let the two images overlap, change it transparency. It's a perfect match. So it seems that Susan Bro, the mother of Heather Heyer, and Donna Soto, the mother of Victoria Soto, is one and the same crisis actors. This is what they do again and again and again. Meanwhile, the Jussie Smollett scandal. Jussie had campaigned for Kamala Harris and is her nephew. Even Michelle Obama intervened via her former chief of staff. The attackers were his personal trainer and an extra on the set. He paid the Nigerian brothers $3,500 with a personal check. How dumb is that? Here you see Jussie with Barack and Michelle Obama, where Laura Ingraham is asking, did Michelle play a role in dropping charges against Smollett? The Chicago mayor and the chief of police were infuriated. It turned out that the two rednecks who allegedly attacked him at 2 a.m. in the morning were actually two Nigerian bodybuilders, one of whom is Jussie Smollett's personal trainer, the other an extra on the set where he's a star. What was he doing out and about at 2 a.m. in Chicago, coming out of a subway on the coldest day of the year? And what were they doing carrying a bottle of bleach, which was frozen solid, and a noose? I mean, it was absurd. The Chicago Police Union has called for a federal probe into the highly suspicious conduct of the prosecutor who intervened in the Jussie Smollett case on behalf of Michelle Obama's ex-aide and texted the Empire Star's family. This is State Attorney Kim Foxx, who dropped the charges after she'd been solicited. It turns out Jussie Smollett is the nephew of Kamala Harris, that he's campaigned with her, that Kamala Harris had an anti-lynching bill that needed a little boost because most senators didn't think it was necessary. So they staged this event and called it a modern-day lynching in order to promote the anti-lynching bill. Turns out Foxx and Harris are close friends. Not only that, Foxx credits Harris as her mentor, the one responsible for her own career. In addition, Harris was part of Foxx's transition team when she became Cook County prosecutor. So it seemed Foxx is very much in debt to Kamala Harris. Meanwhile, we have the George Floyd bait and switch. When he was arrested, he was handcuffed behind his back. Then he was put into a police car that would take him for booking. When he was taken out the other side and put on the ground, what they took out the other side, however, was a black mannequin torso. Unbelievable. So did the cop throw the guy down hard enough to knock off his hair? Just wondering, because I see he has hair when he's being arrested and manacled, then all of a sudden he doesn't have hair when he's lying on the ground. Notice he's also not manacled behind his back. Here you see the hands in front of his back. Impossible given he was manacled behind his back. Here's interesting footage. Check this out. There's no sound, but you see they have what appears to be the body on the ground, and they raise him and put him on a gurney. And what did you see there? No legs. What did you see there? No legs. Where is the rest of his body? I mean, this is embarrassingly bad. This is embarrassingly bad. Just a reflection of how grossly the media has deceived us, how grossly the media has deceived us. Turns out this was a medical training torso. It was actually sold by Sigma 7, which moved out of Minneapolis as soon as the rioting and looting began, no doubt apprehensive that the public would figure out that they were involved. It's an African-American torso airway trainer, completely outrageous. He didn't die from the kneeling on the neck. The whole thing was completely staged. It was a fraud. So how did they do it? They handcuffed him and put him in the police car to take him to the precinct. Normally, that's the key event, getting him in the car. Then you take him to the precinct to be booked and mugshots taken. Instead, they took him out, or what appeared to be him, out the other side and put him on the ground, except what they took out was the training dummy. So this was like a magician's trick. Pathetic, but it worked. Meanwhile, the Bubba Wallace garage door noose. A noose was reportedly found in the garage of a black NASCAR driver. Everyone rallied around him. He received enormous public support. But it turned out to be the rope handle for a common garage door opener. Bubba Wallace and NASCAR had to know the opener was not a threat. This is embarrassingly bad. NASCAR rallies around Bubba Wallace following noose incident. Drivers push car to the front of the pack. After NASCAR revealed a noose was found in Bubba Wallace's garage at Talladega Superspeedway, the racing community made it a point to rally around Wallace and show their support in wake of the incident. The noose was found in the garage being used by NASCAR Cup Series driver Bubba Wallace, but the FBI said its investigation had found The rope was attached to the garage door since at least the fall of 2019. We are thankful that there was no one involved in perpetrating hate during this weekend's race. Just look at it there. Look at it there. A hand could fit in that. See how tightly it's wound here. A hand could fit through that, but not a head. This is obviously not a noose. This is simply a rope fashioned like a noose, one could say. Without knowing details of the incident, he recalled one of the employees recalled seeing a tied handle in the garage and pull down rope. It was immediately alerted, but it was a fraud. It was played up. So here you see the actual in November 2019, the pull down. Nobody would think it was a noose. Then it was cut off in June of 2020. Well, guess what they did? I mean, here you got the FBI completing its investigation. The garage door rope pull, fashioned like a noose, have been positioned there since as early as last fall. Obviously, well before the 43 team's arrival and garage assignment. We appreciate the FBI's quick and thorough investigation. Thankful to learn it wasn't an intentional racist act. But look at this. Look how it's been rewound. How it's been rewound. I mean, this is completely stunning. This means NASCAR is completely involved. Look at the rope. Look at the way it's tied to resemble a noose when the original looked nothing like that. This is embarrassingly bad. Meanwhile, Trump lashes out at the Bubba Wallace NASCAR noose investigation and the federal flag ban. President Trump lashed out at NASCAR's only full-time black driver on Twitter Monday morning, demanding they apologize for an investigation into an apparent noose. I mean, this is just embarrassingly bad. So we have, in lieu of the Blues Brothers of John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd, we have the Hoax Brothers, Jussie Smollett and Bubba Wallace. This is what it has come down to. Meanwhile, the devastating economic effects continue. The blue states are locking down based upon fabricated coronavirus statistics. We knew 75% of U.S. companies could not withstand a lockdown. A third of American families cannot pay the rent or mortgage. More suicides, domestic violence, child abuse, and lost education. Meanwhile, the partisan gap could limit U.S. recovery ahead of the election. But that's what it's all about. Democrats and Republicans hold starkly diverging views over the economy, and the gap is widening as the pandemic persists, casting a shadow over President Trump's hope for a V-shaped recovery powered by pent-up demand as nationwide lockdowns ease. However, while the University of Michigan Index of Consumer Sentiment revealed a political divide, the index rebounded from 72.3 in March to 78.9 in May on the strength of better than expected May job numbers, but it only ticked up 0.7 of a point for Democrats while surging 11 for Republicans. Economists and policymakers use a monthly sentiment survey to predict future consumer spending. The political disconnect reflected in the number could have real-world economic consequences, no doubt. Here's what I and others were pointing out early on. There are about 5.7 million companies in the U.S., 90% of whom have fewer than 20 employees, where 75% of those small businesses couldn't last a month with zero revenues. And now, of course, it's been over 2 months, 2.5. Meanwhile, a third of American families missed their July rent and housing payment. 10% fear they could lose their homes. This is god-awful. The economic fallout from the pandemic does not appear on track for the quick V-shaped recovery many had hoped for. The bleak trend is fueling American worries about evictions and foreclosures, particularly among renters. From June to July, the share of renters who are either very or extremely concerned about being evicted rose from 18 to over 21%. The share of homeowners concerned rose from 14 to 17. It's getting serious. And we know the lockdown, the shelter in place have inevitable consequences of higher suicide rates, domestic violence, derailed education, shorter lifespans, decreased public health services. There are going to be more deaths from suicide because of the lockdown than will occur from the coronavirus itself. But what else can the Democrats do? They have a brain damaged candidate with cognitive incompetence. They have to keep him under wraps, may not even debate Trump. More scandals are surfacing that make him an untenable candidate. They are counting on Google and mail-in ballots to steal 2020. A former White House physician delivers bad news for Biden. I think he has some cognitive issues. Since the early days of the Democrat presidential primary, critics have commented on Joe Biden's apparent mental decline. In more recent weeks, the left-leaning media has been all too quiet to comment on it. However, many Americans have expressed concern. Now a former White House physician is expressing his concern. Ronnie Jackson, doctor, told the Kyle Olson show former Vice President Joe Biden needs to take a cognitive assessment and release the results, but that his campaign won't let that happen. I think he's got some cognitive issues, he continued, before adding, he's not diagnosing the former vice president because he hasn't examined him. But as a medical expert, he's voicing his worries. I'm not comfortable with him being my president. Johnson pointed to various examples of Biden's possible mental problems, including his inability to complete a sentence in moments where Biden appears unaware of where he is. Meanwhile, the stooge Thomas Friedman of the New York Times, to which I have referred for years as the Langley newsletter, has declared that Biden should not debate Trump unless, I worry, writes Friedman, about Joe Biden debating Donald Trump. He should do it only under two conditions. Otherwise, he's giving Trump an unfair advantage. The two conditions he postulated, by the way, were that Trump had to release his tax returns and that there should be a special panel of fact checkers before the debate is over to report on their evaluation. In other words, they would be used to attack Trump more effectively than could Biden himself. Meanwhile, Biden's family is racking up arrests for drugs, drunk driving, but there's no jail time. This is really fascinating. In August of 2019, Carolyn Biden, 33, a niece of the former vice president, was busted in Lower Merion Township, Pennsylvania, for driving under the influence and without a license. It's unusual. Unlikely Carolyn will face much in the way of consequences, however, if history in the Biden family rap sheet or any guide. Here's another illustration. When Christopher Coons of Delaware was sworn in as senator by Joe Biden, then vice president, he leaned down and said to his daughter there, picked up by the mic, "Do you have any idea how horny I am to have a 13-year-old standing next to me? I mean, appalling." And this is not the only disgusting action Joe Biden has taken. Meanwhile, Dr. Robert Epstein has observed Google is going to shift 10% of voters to make Trump a blip in history. This is the same guy who's a former editor-in-chief of Psychology Today, testified a year and a half ago to Congress that Google had sent out selective reminders about voting to Democrat supporters in the South Carolina, not only in the South Carolina primary, which made all the difference for a Joe Biden who in 32 years of campaigning for the presidency have not won a single primary or a single caucus, but back in 2016 already, that Google was responsible for adding between 2.4 and 10.2 million additional votes for Hillary Clinton. And that in 2018, they were responsible for the Democrats regaining control of the House. I believe the reason why we've been seeing all these polls suggesting that Biden is, 9 or 10 points ahead of Trump, which have no basis in fact, is because they're going to make this shift using Google and they want to conceal it. Meanwhile, the deep state benefits. Masks are a symbol of submission and constraint on freedom of speech. They are moving forward with contact tracing as a tool of surveillance. They also appear to be introducing digital currency for total control. And in their pantheon of heroes, Bill Gates stands above them all. A wonderful piece on my blog, go to jamesfetzer.org, Bill Willer's, The Mask as a Symbol of Subjugation. We know that wearing a mask outside of health facilities offers little, if any, protection from infection. That's from the New England Journal of Medicine on May 21st, 2020. They told us exactly what was coming and advised us to shut up and follow orders. Tragically, most people have done just that. C.J. Hopkins, 2020. It's difficult to imagine a crueler attack on the human family than the insidious prevention of person-to-person contact. What amounts to house arrest plus enforced wearing a mask, plus the order to stay a body length from others, has a stated aim of preventing contagion. But actually, philosopher Giorgio Gambrin put it recently, it is political contagion, let it be understood. He has got it right. The contagion that must be checked is not viral, not medical, but political. The triad of official mandates hinders communication that cannot be monitored. If online unauthorized political discourse and strategy can be recorded for the individual's dossier, in the street, not so, at least not yet. In 1933, Hitler suspended the Weimar Constitution following the Reichstag fire. Citizen rights under the Constitution were abolished and never reinstated. Meanwhile, it turns out the mask filter is so coarse it can't possibly filter out these very, very tiny particles. Even the N95 mask filters out particulate matter larger than 0.3 microns. The question then is, how big is a COVID particle? It's only about 0.1 microns. The idea of people doing anything particularly useful by wearing a mask is just Looney Tunes. Observe Dr. Scott Jensen, who's now under investigation for revealing too many truths. We've all turned from normal humans into muzzled masochists, observes Peter Hitchens. When the madness began, I behaved as if a new and fanatical religion was spreading among us. Be polite and tolerant, I thought. It may be crazy and damaging, but in time it'll go away. Now it is clear that a new faith based on fear of the invisible and quite immune to reason has all but taken over the country. And it turns out to be one of those faiths that doesn't have much tolerance for those who don't share it. Meanwhile, Paul Diego, mass tracking, COVID pass, immunity passports, slated to roll out in 15 countries. Again, you can find this on my blog at jamesfetzer.com. COVID pass will determine whether you can go to a restaurant, if you need a medical test, or are due for a talking to by authorities in a post-COVID world. Consent is voluntary, but enforcement will be compulsory. Remember back in the film Casablanca, where a cop stopped a civilian in the Old Maurice section of Nazi-occupied French Morocco and asked him for his papers. He was taken away after he failed to produce them. That is our future. Meanwhile, change is disappearing. This is a step in the move to going to all digital currency, where they'll be able to track every single transaction we make, whether we buy a candy bar, a shotgun, or go to the movies. And if you've ever watched Enemy of the State with Will Smith and Gene Hackman, a completely brilliant movie, which you must see if you haven't already, you can see how easily they can destroy a person's financial ability by simply cutting him off if he doesn't behave the way they want. This appears to be imposing the Chinese social merit system, where as long as you act in conformity with the expectations and preferences of the deep state, you're going to be okay, but otherwise not. Meanwhile, we have a man of great influence, Bill Gates, at the heart of all the funding. Gave $4.3 billion to the World Health Organization, $155 million to the CDC, $8 million to the NIH, a staggering $280 million to Imperial College London, where Neil Ferguson gave us the absurd model predicting 2.2 million American deaths and 500,000 British if we didn't shut down the economy. So the question we have to ask is, what do the Democrats have to fear? Trump could pack the Supreme Court with the conservative appointees. Black support has been rising, will no doubt rise even more. The Epstein-Maxwell sex tapes and more loom in the background. The best predictor gives Trump a 91% chance of victory. No wonder they're running scared. A conservative court, Trump's own appointees declare their independence. It's easy to overestimate the control a president has over outcomes in the court, even though he picks the nominees, where they historically tend to show a great deal of independence. Meanwhile, a new poll is showing Black support for Trump is surging. We got 3 polls showing Trump at 30% or higher with Black voters, he told his national radio audience. We've got Emerson, we've got Rasmussen, we've got Maris. This means that the early Rasmussen poll from December showing Trump with 40% of Black likely voters is holding up. This is Black voters in general. One of my commentators observed on my blog, the USA ended slavery, ended race-based civil rights violations, elected a Black president twice, made our highest Black athletes, musicians, celebrities, and cultural ambassadors Black Americans. If we're a racist nation, we suck at it. For the record, I oppose that sign out there. The Black Lives Matter organization does not care about all Black lives. They don't care about police officers who are killed. They don't care about Black on Black crime at all. They don't care about school choice. It's a very extreme organization that really only cares if a police officer is involved in a killing. A lot of Black Americans, such as myself, will be voting for Donald Trump this year because the Democratic Party has been hijacked by Black lives. That's coming from civil rights attorney Leo Terrell. Meanwhile, Ghislaine Maxwell has a dead woman switch with secret sex tapes in her possession. This is particularly troubling to the Democrats because so many prominent Democrats, including Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and a host of others, appear to have been profoundly involved in child sex abuse, sex trafficking, and ritual sacrifice. It's now part of the Jeffrey Epstein lore that the billionaire sex trafficker had his mansions festooned with cameras, recording his influential friends having sex with underage girls, material that could later be used to blackmail them. The ComPro-Mat op was widely speculated to be an intelligence program run by the Mossad, for whom Epstein was reportedly recruited by Ghislaine's late father, Robert Maxwell. Trump, in his ongoing efforts to drain the swamp, is going to support those revelations, which the Democrats dread. Meanwhile, the most successful predictor, Stony Brook professor Helmut Northrop, who back in 2016 gave Trump an 87% chance of beating Hillary Clinton, has now given him a 91% chance of winning second terms. He's got a model which he curated in 1996, would have correctly predicted the outcome for 25 of the 27 elections since 1912, when primaries were introduced. It calculates the winning candidate based on early presidential nominating contests, placing emphasis on how much enthusiasm candidates are able to generate early in the process. And of course, it turns out Trump had tremendous amount of enthusiasm. The professor observed that his model, which predicted Trump's election in 2016, worked partially by discounting opinion surveys. Poll-based forecasts all handed Hillary Clinton a certain victory. That's fascinating. Meanwhile, we now confront a stark choice between two Americas. Police declare riot in Portland as courthouse fence breached. A Black Lives Matter protester fatally shot in Austin after denouncing the public. A rioter set fire to the Oakland courthouse and attacked the police station. A Black Trump supporter was executed in broad daylight in Wisconsin. These are stories mostly from today. Police declare a riot in Portland as a federal courthouse fence is breached. Look at what's going on there. A Black Lives Matter protester was fatally shot in Austin after saying people who hate us are too big of pussies to actually do anything about it. Someone got out of their car and shot one of the protesters, the live streamer said. He wrote in a follow-up, I was no more than 10 feet from the shooter and running toward his car. It was too close. Currently on my way to give a witness statement to the Austin Police Department. Meanwhile, rioters set fire to Oakland courthouse and attacked the police station there. Hundreds of people were in the streets of Oakland in solidarity with the rioters in Portland, who have been out in force for nearly 60 days straight. Meanwhile, right here in Wisconsin, I was shocked by this. Black Trump supporter executed in broad daylight in Wisconsin. A black man, well known for his boisterous support of President Trump, was shot and killed by an unknown assailant in Milwaukee. Authorities say Burnell Trammell, 60, was sitting outside his publishing company when a vehicle pulled in front of the business and someone shot and killed him execution style before speeding away. Meanwhile, we had a tweet about it. Tragic to learn of the senseless murder of Burnell Trammell. I offer my sincere condolences to his family and friends. No American should fear for their personal safety because of where they live or their political affiliation. That is for sure. Meanwhile, Trump has of necessity been placing emphasis on law and order during an interview, I believe with Sean Hannity. I heard you talking about the cities and the safeties of the cities. I've offered them all, every one of them, and there are 10 of them. We're offering all of them. Let us go in. We'll clean it up. We'll clean it up. Now in Parkland, we had to do it because they're anarchists. There's even a level people haven't seen. They're anarchists. They were going wild for 51 days, and we went in, and they've done a great job. They're going to rip down the courthouse, a big federal courthouse. So we went in. We've been very, very strong, and we have this Mayor Wheeler, also the police commissioner, as I understand. Meanwhile, Trump signaled 75,000 agents ready to go into Democratic-controlled cities to stop the surging violence. President Trump told Fox News host Sean Hannity Thursday the administration is eventually going to have to do something that's much stronger to stop surging violence in multiple Democratic-controlled cities, signaling he has tens of thousands of federal agents ready to be deployed to clean up the streets. Meanwhile, if you reflect upon it, this is a profound observation. The left controls every major institution in America: mainstream media, the academy, administrative government, Hollywood, big tech, etc. So if institutional racism really did exist, whose fault would that be? Michael Knowles. I couldn't agree more. The guy's got it right. If you want more of my reports, which will continue to be broadcasting as this one is being today, I have an archive on BitChute and others on 153news.net. You'll find them under the name of Gus Chambers Videos, or on BitChute on Jim Fetzer's channel. A lot of very important developments are taking place, and I will be doing my best to cover them all. Meanwhile, consider the Democrats are doing their best to destroy the country, but I do not believe they are going to succeed. When you look around and find the United States economy in rubble, who better to restore it to its past greatness than the man who brought us the most robust economy in our history and the most surging stock markets? The American people are going to turn to Donald J. Trump, but the Democrats are going to do everything they can. They're going to cheat, steal, lie, connive. They're going to try to force mail-in ballots, which they can easily rig, and count on Google to bring that extra 10%. Don't let them get away with it. This president has earned your support. He deserves your support. And look at the alternative. This is Jim Fetzer, the conspiracy guy, thanking you for being here with me. And I hope you'll join me again as the conspiracy guy continues reporting on these difficult and complex events that are so troubling in this epoch of American